It's tried to stage a comeback today as investors try to digest the latest tariff headlines, but could concerns also spill over into private capital markets? Joining us now is Sunaina Haldea. She is the global head of private capital advisory at Raymond James. Great to have you also here on set. So tricolor, some other stuff. Is this a canary in the coal mine?
Well, it certainly could be. I think canary or not, we have to admit that private credit has been a huge inflow into the credit markets. It's now a mainstay option for borrowing. And with anything that becomes so mainstream so quickly, there's going to be risks. Not every piece of paper will be underwritten properly or with all the risks taken into account. And that's what we're seeing with these first two bankruptcies. There will be more. Is it going to be enough to be systemic? I don't think so. Because corporate balance sheets are really resilient at the moment. The fundamentals are super strong. But will we see more headlines coming through in the next couple of quarters? Definitely.
Well, how will we know if this is something to really be concerned about? Because if the heat goes up gradually, the frog can get boiled.
Well, I think we need to look at what's happening at the fundamental level of the businesses. How are cash flows doing? What's profitability doing? What is the balance sheet doing? And track those pretty carefully to see where there's systemic risk or not. Right now, there isn't much of it. I mean, I think that there's still a lot of digestion of tariffs. I'm sure we'll get to that in a second. And there's a lot of digestion of what's happening on the macro side, because the macro evolution is just ever evolving for companies today, AI inclusive. So all of that put to one side, most companies have been shoring up for a good run here. And that's what we're seeing with all these guidance beats this week and also back in April when we needed it.
So you just mentioned it, tariffs. How are you navigating tariffs? What do investors need to understand about tariffs? How much of a wild card are tariffs?
So I do think that investors are underpricing tariff risk. So we've seen up until the tariffs were announced in April from Liberation Day through summer that a lot of companies undertook inventory stockpiling. So we've had all of that stockpile come down now, be run off. And so we're seeing those that don't have pricing power, companies without pricing power, are starting to pass through costs to consumers. And this is the big and, you also have a U.S. dollar impact because you've got dollar index at all-time lows for the year. That makes import costs even higher. It's sort of the salt on the wounds of those that have to deal with tariffs. So you have a double whammy here. Now, all tariff costs will not be passed through at one time to consumers for some kind of one-time hit. We've seen that over the last quarter because of inventories, because of careful absorption by certain companies. Those that could absorb have done so already. Now we're going to start seeing the pass-through to consumers, and that's what we have to look for. That's why I think the Fed has a really thin line to walk here. Of course, there'll be a couple of cuts because of what's happening in the job market, but I don't think we should be betting on inflation going away.
That was the next thing I was going to ask you is how you factor in the Fed. I actually thought the comments from Fed Chair Powell about the fact that maybe the balance sheet, they let that run off, if you will, in coming weeks was very notable.
It is notable, and I think that he's trying to walk this fine balance, but I don't think he's sure how it goes even with his own voting governors, as we've seen in the last minutes and what's happening in his own house, if you will. So I think that there is going to be this balancing act between what's happening in the labor market. There is labor market softening. That's what he said today. I think that's what's going to give him the headroom to make that next cut or maybe even make the next two cuts. But beyond that, as we see potential pass-through, nobody knows what the world looks like. But as you see what tariffs impacts is to the inflation and to consumer, he may have to walk a different type of